Good morning, Moray Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing our Masechet Sukkah. We are on Daf Zayin, Amud Aleph, by 2 dots, about 13 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. And today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Nisim ben Miriam, which is the father-in-law of one of our own Chevra that was involved in a hit and run accident. Should be Refuah Shelema for him, and also for the girl in our community we have all been davening for, Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, Refuah Shelema, also being dedicated for Refuah Shelema, Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, a young mother that needs real Racham Shamayim, Yeshuot and Refuot Be'ezrat Hashem. Should be a Refuah for her as well. This week's learning that the community has been dedicated by the Shea family, by Dayan family, by Kohen families, should be an ultimate zchut for all the mishpachot Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. Okay, so we are going to do actually some sugyas from Eruvin. This is going to become harder before it becomes easier. Like, in other words, the next daf of Masechet Sukkah is a little bit complicated. It gets to the Eruvin sugyas, and then it becomes like normal Sukkah Masechta, which is much lighter, much easier to digest. But before that, the Gemara says we spoke about walls of Sukkah. We spoke about where do you have to have 3 walls when you talk about Shnaim Keil Chatam Ushtishit Afilu Tefach, 2 walls plus a tefach. We spoke about whether or not you can have the tefach adjacent to the wall when you have a 90 degree between the 2 attached walls, or what do you do when you have a maboy, when you have 2 parallel walls and not really an attached 2 walls, and perhaps you need a tefach sochek, the same tefach, but it has to be making at least 4 tefachim of a wall with that 1 tefach. So now the Gemara is going to discuss what do you do when it comes Shabbat and Sukkah together, because we spend a lot of time. If I could get the board, that would be amazing. We spend a lot of time in discussion of what are walls of Sukkah. But we also have these sugyas in Masechet Shabbat and Eruvin. What is considered a proper wall for Shabbat? For instance, if you have, there is a concept called a dofan, a mechitza, that's gru'ah. It's not a full, solid, sturdy wall, but it is, for instance, vertical pulls around an entire area. And these vertical pulls, they have less than 3 tfachim of space between them, right? Less than 3 tfachim of space between them, and you have around the entire area this wall of poles. Is that considered? I'm thinking, is that considered a? This is actually sufficient. Yeah, just a marker would do. Is that considered a proper mechitza or not? And the halakha is, well, so long as it is less than 3 tfachim between them, it is kasher, it's fine. Or if you have horizontal poles or ropes going around less than 3 tfachim away from each other, that's also considered a mechitza, so long as you get it up to 10 tfachim. So you'll need 3 of those, or 4 of those ropes, and you'll get up to 1 meter. You get up to 80 centimeters, depending on what shita you follow. But that would be your mechitza gru'ah. Now, it has in Masechet Shabbat and Eruvin, you have rules and regulations of how much you could carry in such a reshut that has been created by mechitza gru'ah, but that's considered a mechitza. Now, there are also things that are considered a chidush for Shabbat and for Eruvin. For instance, we mentioned before the Gemara in Eruvin that talks about paseh biraot, that when you want to feed your animals that should drink water on Shabbat, and you're traveling, if you have, let's say, a be'er, if you have a well, inside the well is considered a shut hayachid. Outside of it is a shut harabim. You can't draw water out of that well, right? Unless, of course, you have paseh biraot, which is, elements like this from each side. This is thin, so make sure you can see. Can you see this from the back? Yes? Oh, there's light. Okay, do we have the black things here? I'll be sorry to bother you. That would be if you have, let's say, a well inside and you have the two small beams from each side, that each one of them is an amah, that would be sufficient. Well, in Shabbat, you have a halacha that for a mechitza, a regular mechitza, oh, thank you so much. It's much better this way. So a regular mechitza on Shabbat has to be omed yoter min parutz, right? In other words, if you have the poles that we mentioned, that you have around an area, poles vertically inside the ground that are less than 3 tfachim away, it is kasher, and the reason is, it's not going to go away. The reason it's kasher is because less than lavud is considered completely closed. Fine? But on Shabbat, if you have a mechitza that is parutz merube al haomed, in other words, you have, let's say, a lot of doors inside this. Here, we mentioned that this is kasher for Shabbat, right? For Sukkah, right? You have 2 full walls, and the third one is afilu tefach, right? So what if I have a door here? Imagine I have a door that opens here. This whole thing is a door, right? And I have another door here, open. Is that kasher Sukkah still? Yeah, it's still kasher. Now, if you go around, I'm missing this whole wall. I'm missing this whole wall, aside from 1 tefach, and I have a door open here, and I have a door open here. Do I have more walls or more open? Certainly more open. Parutz merube al haomed. What's open is more than what's standing, and still is a kasher sukkah. Because I have 2 doors, two walls. The fact that I have windows and doors in it, it's okay. That's considered by Shabbat. When you have a mechitza around something, it has to be omed yoter min parutz. It has to be more wall than open. That's a regular halacha by Shabbat. When you want to talk about carrying on Shabbat, forget about Sukkah, Chag HaSukkot, just Shabbat. You have to have more wall than open. Now the question now starts, how about when Shabbat and Sukkah coincide? Which one do you follow? Do you say that this Sukkah that we just spoke about is good on a regular Tuesday, but when it comes time for Shabbat, you have to fix your walls? Do we say that? Or do we say, well, for Sukkah is considered a wall, so once for Sukkot is considered a wall, we allow it for Shabbat as well? This is going to be the question we're going to deal with, right? And we have it the other way around as well. There are certain chidushim in Hilchot Shabbat. We started with paseh biraot, right? Now I can make it black here, right? If you have a well, right, in Hilchot Shabbat, this would be considered, inside of here would be considered the shut yachid. Now can you see it? Yes, okay. So this certainly is not enough walls, and yet it's considered reshut hayachid. Can I just put a schach on top of that and call it a day? Can I do that? We have chidushim in Hilchot, or as we will see, we spoke about this. You remember how when you have a maboy, when you have a alleyway, you need to have, it was machloket in the Gemara. Either you need a board that's 4 tfachim wide, right? And you put it less than 3, and the subtotal would be 7. Or the minimum that we had was, you need 1 tefach sochek, that's going to be here, within 3 tvachim, and the subtotal would be 4, right? That would be the minimum, okay? Now there is a shita, as we will see in just a moment, that for eruvin, if you have a maboy, if you have a alleyway, for eruvin, you put one beam next to one side of the wall and you're good to go. One beam, that's 1 tefach wide. Attach, you drill it to the wall, it's sticking out 1 tefach, hazak, and 10 tefachim high, hazak ubaruch. Have a nice day. That means for Shabbat, that one beam makes the alleyway a reshut hayachid. Right?
Yeah, it's good.
Now you could carry, provided that you put eruv, shtufe mevoot, you could carry in this maboy. Can I just put drop a schach on top of that alley and make it a sukkah? Well, that would be the reverse case, right? That once you tell me for Shabbat this is the Reshut HaYachid, can it also be for Sukkah? Where we just learned for Sukkah usually doesn't work, right? Usually you need 7 tefachim or at least 4 tefachim. 1 tefach doesn't work. You see why this Gemara is extremely important and relevant. We have different guiding rules for what's considered mechitza and a private domain for Shabbat. And we have different rules guiding the halachot of what is considered a Reshut HaYachid, a mechitza for Sukkah. So when it becomes Shabbat of Sukkah, of Chag HaSukkot, now you have to scratch your head. Do we say once it is considered a mechitza for Sukkah, we could also use it for Shabbat? Or once it's considered a mechitza for Shabbat, we could use it for Sukkah? Or do we not say that? Now this, in the language of the Gemara, is known as migu. Migu means once. Once I could say it for this, I could say it for that. Once it's considered a mechitza for this, it could be considered a mechitza for that. Once it's kasher for Sukkot, it could be kasher for Shabbat also. Once it's kasher for Shabbat, it could be kasher for Sukkot as well. That's migu, right? It's known as migu inside in the Gemara, in the Sugya. So says Gemara, with all that said, right, let's actually get into how this pans out. Amar Rava. This that we need shdaim keilchatan ushlishit afilu tefach, 2 full walls and the third one a tefach. Amar Rava vechel Shabbat. It's going to be the same for Shabbat. That means this little wall, right, that we just mentioned, this is scenario 1, right? This is the first case that we discussed. That is a regular sukkah, right? 2 walls and a third wall of tefach. None of these exists, right? That sukkah, and it has a door inside, says Rava, Vechen le'inyan Shabbat. This sukkah, even though that if you go with a measuring tape around, there is much less wall than open, still is kasher for Shabbat. Why? Migu dehavya dofan le'inyan sukkah. Once we imagine that this is all closed up for sukkah, it has 4 walls, mamash. That's how it's considered a Reshut HaYachid. It's considered its own domain. Havya dofan le'inyan Shabbat. It's going to also be a kosher wall and kosher domain for Shabbat as well. Even though that we already explained, a mechitza to be kasher for Shabbat, you need what? You can't have parutz merubem al ha'omed. You can't have more open than more wall. And here you have more open than wall, because 2 complete sides are open, minus a tefach, and then you have a door in each one of those walls that you actually have. And it still says Rava should be kasher because of this migu. Abaye, right, didn't like this at all. So Abaye said, wait a second, what are you talking about? Umi amrin al migu? Do we really say migu? do we compare this? In other words, Abaye says, you know what we should be saying? What we should be saying is, Shabbat has its own halachot, Sukkah has its own halachot, and Chazaku Baruch. Keep things simple. Right? Regular Tuesday of Chag HaSukkot, this is kasher. Comes to Shabbat, no way. You have to make more walls over here, right? For it to be kasher. You have to have Omet Merube ala Parutz. And keep them simple. Each one has its own halachot. And it says, says Abaye, we learned in a Braita that the Dofan of Sukkah is the same halachot as Dofan of Shabbat, ובלבד שלא יהא בין קנה לחברו 3 טפחים. If you have these poles, right, that we spoke about, each pole is less than 3 tfachim away, and you have these vertical poles, it's considered closed up, right? So long as it's not 3 between them, it's considered completely closed. It's like a solid wall. V'yetera Shabbat ala Sukkah. The Braita continues that Shabbat is more chamur, it's more stringent than Sukkah. Shabbat ena niteret ela be'omed merube ala parus. Says the Braita, this is a Braita, it's a Tanaic word, that for it to be considered a kosher mechitza for Shabbat, you need more wall than open, right? Omed merube ala parus. Ma she'enken besukkah. What is not true in Sukkah, we already explained how, right? That if you have 2 complete open sides and you have doors in each one of those other walls, still is kasher for Sukkah. So says Abaye, Rava, please pay attention to these words of the Braita. My love yetera Shabbat is Sukkah. Doesn't it mean that the Shabbat of Chag HaSukkot is more stringent than the regular Tuesday of Chag HaSukkot, which would mean you need to fix these 2 walls and make more wall than open, which would indicate that we don't say migu, right? We don't mix and match the halachot, keep them separately, and a Shabbat of Chag HaSukkot you just have to make more wall, right? Which would mean no migu. So it says Gemara, no, that's not. Rava answers Abaye, says no, that's not what he means. It means exactly the opposite. Lo yetera Shabbat de alma al Shabbat de Sukkah. What it means is a regular Shabbat during December is more chamur than Shabbat of Chol HaMoed Sukkot. Which means that a regular Shabbat on November would be a requirement of more wall than open. Once it gets to Shabbat of Chag HaSukkot, you don't have that requirement. That's what the Braita. So Rava says, not only it's not a kasha, what you're saying and what I'm saying, it's a proof for what I'm saying, right? It is exactly saying the halakha that on Shabbat of Chag HaSukkot, you could just rely on Hilchot Sukkah, and you don't need all the stringent requirements of mechitzot of walls on Shabbat. So the Gemara says, Yachi litni nami, Abaye is not a pushover. Abaye says, okay, but if that's correct, if you already say migu, if you hold that we mix and match these halachot and a Shabbat of Sukkot, the halachot are completely different, then litni nami yetera sukkah de alma sukkah de Shabbat. You should also say that the regular halachot of Sukkah are more stringent than a Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkah. Why? Because obviously Abaye is talking to Rava. He says, I happen to remember your shita, Rava, when it comes to the halachot of mechitzot on Shabbat. You have some serious kulas over there. Says Abaye to Rava. We just learned in last shiur that when you have a maboy, when you have an open street, open alleyway, you need a tefach sochek, right? You need to create a minimum of 4 tfachim, which means you have a beam that's a little bit thicker, wider than 1 tefach, and you put it a little bit less than 3 tfachim away from the wall, and you'll end up with a wall that's 4 tfachim. Or, even more than that, you take a beam that's wide 4 tfachim plus, and you put it a little bit mashu less than 3 tfachim, and then you end up with a 7 tfachim wall. That's the minimum. Rava, you hold that as well when it comes to sukkah, right? Nobody argued with that. But do you know what Rava holds when it comes to Shabbat? Nothing. You just need 1 tefach here, 1 little pole attached to the wall, 1 tefach only, and you're good to go for Shabbat. That's considered Reshut HaYachid. Now, to be completely open for intellectual honesty, this becomes, I'm making this overly simplified. This really becomes Machlokat Rashi versus Ritba and Tosafot, whether or not this is a dead-end cul-de-sac, or even with the alleyway that is open, mefulash from 2 sides, okay? So we're not going to get into that. That's the real Eruvin Sugya, which we're not going to get to, but this is the simple understanding. Says the Gemara, you're the one that holds that 1 tefach over here, on Shabbat, makes this a kosher Reshut HaYachid, right? So a regular sukkah, would this be kasher? Absolutely not. You need 4 or 7, right? That's on a regular Tuesday, Chag HaSukkot. And you, Rava, would hold that on Shabbat of Chol HaMoed Sukkot, this area is considered Reshut HaYachid with this 1 little tefach over here, little beam, standing next to the wall, right? So it turns out, according to you, says Abaye, that not only Shabbat is more than Sukkah, Sukkah also is more than Shabbat sometimes. This is an open example of that. So if you're telling me Migu already, if you're mixing and matching the halachot of walls on Shabbat and Sukkah, it should go both ways. Ends up being that you will be extremely lenient on Shabbat Chol HaMoed Sukkah, right? Because you're applying all the leniencies. You're applying the leniency of Shabbat and you're leniency of Sukkah. So says the Gemara, because the ilu Sukkah de Alma, this is the second wide line, Sukkah de Alma baya tefach sochek. A regular Tuesday in Chag HaSukkot, you need a tefach sochek, which would be this 4 or the 7, but at least this 4. But nevertheless, v'ilu Sukkah de Shabbat lo baya tefach sochek. Sukkah on Shabbat shouldn't need tefach sochek. V'saki belechi, and should be sufficient with a one lechi, 1 beam, 1 tefach wide, next to the wall of the mabui, the street. The ha'athu damrat, because you, Rava, you are the one that holds sichech al gabe mabui, that if you put a drop, a schach over here, right? Imagine from midway here, you start a schach, you put schach over here, and that's your sukkah now. Sichech al gabe mabui, sheyesh lo lechi, so long as you have this 1 tefach lechi, Rava holds kasher. Because once for Shabbat is kasher, for Sukkah is also kasher. And the Gemara gives the ultimate answer. The Gemara says, yes, that happens to be correct according to Rava. So what? Well, Chazak Baruch. Why didn't I say it in the? Because he doesn't need to say it. Which one is more chamur? Halachot of Shabbat or halachot of Sukkah when it comes to mechitza? Shabbat. Pashut. So I'm telling you, even a mechitza that's working for Sukkah, which is lower, is good enough for Shabbat, which is higher. Do I have to tell you that a leniency that happens to apply to Shabbat, which is here, applies to Sukkah that's here? Of course not. That's Kal Vachomer. I would for sure know that if I have a reliance on a leniency on Shabbat, that I could use it for Sukkah. Hazaku Baruch, I have to say that? I don't have to say that. Pashut, right? So Gemara is coming out. According to Rava, we do say Migu. That means we overlap the halachot of Sukkah and Shabbat when it comes to Chol HaMoed, Shabbat, Chol HaMoed, Sukkot. And Enachinami, we will use all the leniencies applicable to both on that Shabbat. So you will have a massive leniency according to Rava that this whole Maboy, whether it's closed on the top, on the end or not, but the schach is not going to the end. So you don't have this as a wall, right? Schach is going to the middle. And you only have one tefach over here. And still it's kasher. And you also can have this type of sukkah, which you have one door in the middle of this wall, and another door in the middle of this wall. And nothing here aside from this one little tefach, and still is kasher. Even though that you have let's call it 10 meters of open area, right? And only 5 meters, 6 meters of wall, still will be kasher. Why? Because once it will be kasher for Sukkah, it will be kasher for Shabbat as well. So that's what we're saying so far. Says the Gemara. Let's just read the last piece that we explained outside. Gemara says that's correct. But he didn't have to say it. Why didn't he have to say it? Because hashta mikilta lechamirta amrinan. We say from kula to chumrah. That means for sukkah, if it's kasher, it's going to be kasher even for Shabbat, which is much higher level. So of course it goes without saying that if it's kasher for Shabbat, that will be kasher for sukkah. Michamirta lekila lo kolshken, it's going to be a kolshken, it's going to be a karva chomer. So now next Gemara, we're going to have two scenarios. Now we're basically over the bump, okay? Because these conceptual things of Shabbat, Eruvin, and Sukkah, we had to explain properly. We ought to understand what migu means over here, and to understand the basics. Now the Gemara is going to just give examples of two other scenarios in which Rava holds that this mechitza works, and the Gemara is going to explain and discuss the srichuta, the need of them being discussed, which we'll see Bezat Hashem in the next year. Hazaku Baruch.
But Rava's opinions